these skills together and then force the individual to find a way to navigate it and apply what we're talking about to create some more offense. Because really, at the end of the day, that's what we want to be able to do.
Mason, my big question, Sami, Joe, and Rick in particular, I'm thinking myself, in 2002, we were still learning to pass and shoot and score, like deliberately shoot with power and accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
But by 2010, the female game had evolved. And it hasn't evolved to this level yet, Sami. How far away are we from, and you're working in the professional league with the best women in the professional league in Toronto. How far away are they from appreciating and applying and observing and taking the game to this level?
Well, Wally, I think you're right. It certainly has transformed a lot in the last little bit, but I do think some of the players, this is how they think, for sure. I mean, I think that that's what separates them from being, and I look at somebody like Marie-Philippe Poulin, like how is she so good compared to the best, right? And I think this is what she does so well, is she's thinking about that first touch. I loved, Mason, when you regarded it like soccer as to setting yourself up for the next step and thinking of it more like chess, a couple moves in advance. I would say that women hockey players, for the most part, at a younger age, have a better thought process when it comes to the game and don't necessarily have the skill to go along with it. And so I think this is something very teachable at those early, say at Tom's group's age, because I think they're more willing to absorb things. And so I think it is something that will come very quickly to all players in the women's game. I think what I see a big difference at our level is that first step after the first touch. Mm-hmm. That, I think players are thinking about that first touch, but not necessarily have the ability to back it up with that skill to then explode off that. But it's funny when you're doing all the clips, Mason, I was watching the goalie most of the time. I had to really focus on not watching the goalie. And so many of the transition clips, the goalie is simply not scanning. So the goalies, we have also that same concept within the game of you should always be checking to see where everyone is. And a lot of them, especially in O-zone turnovers, had stopped thinking that their D or their forwards are carrying the puck out and had sort of relaxed a little. And that, to me, is what caused the goal, not necessarily the great play, but that the goalie didn't track the puck all the way out of the zone. So that's what I saw, that the goalie was simply on wrong angles consistently, very deep, and had sort of put their hands down to take a breather, is what it looked like.
Yeah.
And then was all off angle and was trying to catch up the whole play. So anyways, it was hard for me not to look at the goalies all the time.
It's hard for the goalie mind to stop looking at goalies and look at players.
I know, because they're doing so much wrong in those early clips that you were showing, but I digress.
Well, no, but it's a great awareness too. Like even with the players, I try to tell them, especially, so we'll use the hash marks as a marker when we're attacking or any type of turnover in the O-zone. Hash marks to the goal line, it's a weird gray area for goalies. We find are they transitioning into the post? Are they going to do the overlap? What is their game plan? And so try to tell them, if you got nothing and you're attacking, just tossing something that's a little bit taking 20, 30% off your shot, it's going to catch them by surprise. They don't really, it's a weird position for them. So they're playing percentages.
Even that one where, I'm not sure if it's the Jets where it was Scheifele was in front of the net, or who that was down low in front of the net.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, coming out as the fifth one out of the zone. I mean, that should be a very simple play for a goalie in front. He doesn't make a great move or anything. It's just simply dumping the puck in, and the goalie just doesn't seem ready. But you have a man standing right in front of you, you got to be ready until they leave the zone,
Yeah, and that's a good rule of thumb for a goalie. actually like recruiting goalies is probably one of the hardest things to do at our level because we just don't have a goalie guy. We have like the NHL gives us a guy that comes down. He's awesome, but he's only down for 4 times a year. So
Right.
like we only know so much, and it's interesting like when you're recruiting a goalie, is the goalie engaged until the puck's out of the zone, or are they just like, oh, we got the puck, we're all good, and then turnover happens, it's like, oh boy, this is going to be, and it goes into the theme of today, which is transition. They can't transition back fast enough.
Right, and the panic mode that ensues. Mm-hmm.
And that
Yeah,
happens.
it was interesting watching that.
So,
Sami, how would you use what you've seen looking at it as a goalie? It's like we're watching it like offensive players. I watch it like defensive players. Like I was watching the players playing defensively more than I was after the transition. And that's sort of how we're conditioned by the positions we played or coached at. But how would you, if you coached his goalies and you had those clips, how would you use those clips with his goalies?
Well, I think there's kind of a rule of thumb in goaltending. Obviously, the games are long, like 2.5 hour, 3 hour games where you're mentally on. You can't be mentally on the whole time, or you would go bananas. I mean, you'd be so exhausted. So you have to take a breather. But the rule of thumb is on the way in, as they're transitioning into your zone, from the red line, you should be ready. I mean, the game is so fast, you should be ready at that point. And then on the way out to the blue line, because once they've passed the blue line, you can take a breather and you can start to be a fan. You have to be able to transition your brain into going 90 miles an hour to simply being a fan and watching the game. And then, anticipating that when it comes back over the red line, you can then get back into mode. But you do have to take some breathers or you're going to be mentally exhausted. To me, these were all mistakes that these goalies all know that. I mean, that's not something that they don't know. But often these will happen late in a shift that they've been hemmed in, or late in a period and the goalie is maybe not as mentally aware. So I think with the advent of goalies standing higher now and having sort of more of an upright stance, it's hard to decipher if the goalie is actually ready a lot of the times.
yeah.
And so it becomes really up to the goalie to ensure that they are there, because these clips are tough because the goalie is kind of in a high stance, which nowadays that's the expectation. And because of that high stance, that's why a lot of them were just like low redirects in tight, because the goalie was up so high with these new little like mini sticks that they play with. So that's for a whole nother discussion. But if I was the coach coaching the goalies in these situations, it would just be a reminder to track those pucks, follow those pucks, and keep scanning until that last player has crossed the blue line on the way out, and then take your breather.
I want to do, we have some minor hockey coaches that watch this. In fact, we got an awful lot of minor hockey coaches who respond in appreciation. And sometimes when we do a session like this at that level of play, minor hockey coaches tend to have higher expectations what their players should do. So I get concerned about showing advanced tactics. And Tom's coaching U13, coaching U15 girls next year, and he's coached pro in Europe. Rick coached AAA in Canada years ago. And I'm worried about minor hockey coaches and what are they taking out of this, or are they going to be expecting too much or say it's impossible and get more frustrated when the kids can't do something because it's too advanced?
Well, Wally, I can tell you that simply with my 7-year-old Squishmallows, what I think this whole, like the whole video sequence, I think is great. And just simply that first touch, thinking about it, I think is really key. And being prepared, that's what I take out of this whole thing, is be prepared with the scans of what is, I mean, the majority of my coaching, obviously at the Toronto 6 level, I am the president, so I'm not coaching. I mean, I'm watching like a fan, and so I'm not doing that. but I either coach U7 or adult women rec. And so this is very basic, but simply the idea of going into a play and looking to see who's around me. Just that, I think, is just such an amazing concept that most players don't do. You'll separate yourself from 90% of the players at those entry levels if you simply do that. And I think that that's what makes this really shows. If you can connect the dots between what is happening there and there, that's huge.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's awesome. That was the goal. So hopefully, I'm glad it translated.
Rick,